Riley Gaines has said that she wants to sue Pink News for accusing her of harassment and being linked to a bomb threat. But can she sue, and will it be successful? Stay tuned. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to our learned friend, Mr. Robertshaw. How are you doing today, Al?
Very well, thank you, on this drizzly bank holiday.
Indeed. We make the most of it by doing videos here, don't we? So what's this all about? So for those of you that are not familiar with Riley Gaines, all you really need to know for the purposes of this video is that she is a pro swimmer and was lost out on a trophy, a swimming trophy, to Leah Thomas, a transgender competitor. And this whole story hit the news quite widespread. And then there was a talk at this library where somebody was prevented from speaking. And this obviously was met with a lot of backlash. Riley Gaines then put a tweet out to say, "This is ridiculous, but not shocking. A female athlete silenced for calling a spade," she says. They won't even engage in civil conversation. Props to this girl for sticking her ground. Do we know the librarian's name and or phone number? We need silent majority to do its thing. Not clear what its thing was referring to, but this was the tweet that then sparked a response from Pink News, who then wrote this article to say that she was linked to harassment and linked to a bomb threat and so on. And so then over on Twitter, Riley Gaines then says, "This is libel and character assassination. You're the only one inciting violence and outrage by this post, etc." I responded to say this might well be defamatory. I tagged our learned friend, Mr. Robertshaw, in here. House Chambers, if you're not already following, go and do that after this video. And quite poignantly, a question below said, well, not a question, a statement below says, "It's not defamatory, it's opinion." We don't quite agree with that, do we, Al? So where does she go from here?
Well, where does she go is a very good question, because the first thing is, in which jurisdiction would she sue? I'm not sure where she's located. Pink News, it's a UK-based publication. So the obvious thing to do would be, the starting point would be, sue in the UK, but you have to sue where the damage is caused. And arguably these days, when everything's online, and we've discussed this lots of times about how you can forum shop and you can argue and say, well, actually, this would be a good place to have any potential trial. And people do that to sort of, try and sort of get the jurisdiction that's perhaps got the best rules or the best approach to cases that sues them. I mean, traditionally, England and Wales was always seen as a very claimant-friendly jurisdiction. Post the 2013 Act and a few cases subsequent, that has very much changed. And I think it surprises people as to how this can be quite a defendant-friendly jurisdiction now. But yeah, where would she sue? I mean, we can discuss, the general principles for defamation anyway, because in most common law countries they're reasonably similar, but then you have a few slight differences between what you have to prove in terms of loss, whether you have to show malice, things like that. So the US arguably has much stronger First Amendment free speech protections. So in a lot of jurisdictions in the US, it's very, very defendant friendly. And and we watch the sort of courts, how that pendulum swings. I mean, there was a bit of a pushback to try and get back on the sort of public figure thing. The idea that if you're a public figure, unless it's said with malice, i.e., knowing it's not true, you have no cause of action. And there was a bit of an attempt to try and say, well, hang on a second, that just leaves us an open target. But the Supreme Court has said, no, we're quite happy with how things are. If you stick your head above the parapet, tough people can talk about you. But let's assume that, she would sue in England and Wales. Well, what would she have? Certain hurdles she would have to overcome. I mean, this is all going to turn on the interpretation of words, which are findings of fact. Now, of course, in the UK, we don't have juries for defamation cases anymore. So a judge would have to interpret those words. And there are two things here. The first thing is, what is the sting of the libel? What is Pink News actually accusing Riley Gaines of? And it's this word linked to. Okay. Now, when you look at that headline, linked to bomb threat on California library. Okay, so does does linked imply some sort of causative effect? And we've had this quite a few times, in cases where just because two things happen sequentially, are you suggesting they are causative? I could say something, the word after, this crops up a lot, after doing X, Y happened. But does that necessarily mean they are connected? And this is going to be one of the questions. Now, this would all go to a meanings hearing. And as we've said before, that's decided by a judge. Now, each side will argue what they say the meaning is. And no doubt Riley Gaines will say, the suggestion here is that I encouraged, or it's my fault that a bomb threat was made, that I am responsible for the bomb threat. What Pink News will argue is say, no, linked just means there is a connection. We're not holding her responsible necessarily. Although I've seen a further reference to a tweet where they somebody accused of stochastic terrorism, which is something we can perhaps discuss later. Oh, I've used a T word. Hopefully that won't matter. But yeah, I mean, there'll be this thing about what the meaning of the word is, okay? But also what's going to crop up in this case is what we call bane and antidote. So you cannot look at the headline in isolation or the tweet in isolation because they have, and presumably that's because I know they've been sued before, so they probably have some like legal advice. They have linked to the full article. And the courts, in a case like this, would probably say, well, the fact that there is a link to the full article in the tweet, you don't have to look any further, it's in the tweet. A reasonable reader would click on that to say, oh, what's all this about then? And then would read through the entire story here. Now, what the story says basically is it mentions the tweet that is put up, and it mentions there is a bomb threat. Now, if those two facts are true, then that story is accurate. Now, it might well be that that story is not as sensational as the headline, but if that takes the sting out of the headline, if it's a case of, oh, wow, this woman's clearly inciting, sort of wrongdoing. Oh, actually, now I've read that story. No, all it's saying is that after she put a tweet out, somebody else did something wrong. So that's not her fault. It's the fact that people can look at the story themselves. Now, that's not to say that the story wouldn't be interpreted in that sort of inoffensive way, to suggest that there isn't a cause of action. But it's just to say that's what the court would likely look at. They would say, taking into account everything and not cherry picking individual words or phrases, what would your hypothetical reasonable reader, who is not overly suspicious but not also naive, what would they interpret this whole thing to be suggesting? And because they've effectively put that article there, and assuming the facts are correct, that there was this tweet and then there was at some stage this phone call, they've got loads of defences there because even if they are unsuccessful in saying this isn't defamatory, they can say, actually, well, it's true because this is what happened. So if people are reading this saying, well, yes, that is a defamatory allegation because you are suggesting that the tweet caused this, well, we have put in the story exactly what happened. So basically we can plead truth. There's all the public interest defences. The other thing, of course, is that Riley Gaines would have to show that she has suffered serious harm. Now, what is serious harm? Well, one thing is, the courts generally tend to go with if you're accusing somebody of a criminal offence, then if it's an offence that could attract 12 months or more, that actually we will infer that that would cause you serious harm to be accused of something so serious. Now, if I just accuse somebody falsely of a bit of speeding or something like that, or a summary offence or something that can only get a fine, then that's not necessarily defamatory. But if I accuse somebody of a serious offence, then it is. So what offences could come into play here? And again, this is something, and we've seen this in lots of defamation cases where people have argued and said that was clearly an allegation of X offence, this very serious one, and the defence have argued and say, well, no, actually, that could encompass a load of things, and it's more that we're suggesting that he was guilty of some summary offence that only attracts a fine. Therefore, unless he can show a specific loss after that, because proving serious harm is an essential thing for the claimant to do. Unless there is serious harm, it's not defamatory. It actually says that a statement is not defamatory unless there's serious harm, regardless of how offensive it may well be. So what offences are we looking at? It's probably going to be some sort of what we call incitement offence. Now, we don't use the term incitement anymore. There used to be offences of incitement, the general offence of just inciting somebody to commit a crime. These are all dealt with now under the Serious Crimes Act 2007. Now, this is an act I'm very familiar with because I have to, when I do my talks for the activists, not only do I have to tell them about this act, I have to be very careful not to breach it myself. Because all that is required, there are three sections that come into play. But what they all effectively have in common is you do something that incites or encourages somebody to commit a crime. And the difference between the offences is a specific crime, a crime of a crime of a particular nature, or crimes generally. Okay? The interesting thing about the Serious Crimes Act is the penalty for the offence is, generally speaking, the same as the offence that you are inciting somebody to do. So if I sort of go, yay, everybody go out there and drive at 33 in a 30 zone, what would the penalty there be for me? I mean, they could fine me, but they probably couldn't give me any points. So I'd probably be less there. But if I sort of say, hey, everybody go out and, commit armed robbery, rob the sub post office, then, I'd be looking at 12 years, arguably, for inciting that. So what offences can we look at? Well, this could be everything from a malicious communication, if it was like an obvious hoax and it was just there to worry and harass people. It could be an offence under very serious legislation, under the T-word acts. If it's a genuine, because to commit sort of offences under, I'm going to say the T word, right? Sounds a bit like tourism. Then putting the whole point of that offence is to put people in fear. It's not necessarily to carry out the act. So intimidation, threatening people, making people think this is a genuine, possibility. There's an immediate risk of this actually happening. Then that can be an offence. But the courts do look at this in terms of how seriously should somebody take this offence. There was this all goes back to a tweet about a similar threat, and this is the Robin Hood Airport case. And you may remember somebody annoyed about a delay tweeted and said, "I've got a bomb and I'm going to blow the airport up," and he was prosecuted. But then, on appeal, the court said, "This is all your own fault. You brought this on yourself." However, the prosecution would need to prove that the threat was, quotes, real. And by real, they mean that not necessarily that it would happen, but that it was reasonable to think that it might imminently happen. So if you sort of go, you know what, I know this isn't, this is just the usual people. We get bomb threats all the time. We get threats all the time. We know it's just blowhards. Then arguably the offence isn't made out. But of course, they could argue and say, well, no, we can point to real examples of organisations like us and newspapers like us and news outlets who have faced real, genuine, serious threats and real harm. So, of course, we took it seriously. So, arguably, and again, the funny thing here is it'd be Riley Gaines arguing that the allegation is serious. She would be saying that is an allegation that I have incited a serious offence for which I could be punished by more than 12 months. And that would get her over the serious harm thing. But like I said, it's not that clear cut because I can see that there are certainly defences available to pink news. But these cases are very, very risky because if a judge came down and said, yes, I find you have actually, the meaning of this is your average reader looking at both the headline, tweet, and the article would say, actually, yes, this is suggesting that Riley Gaines is genuinely personally responsible for a genuine serious threat. And in that case, that would be a very, very serious, um, allegation.
And
And
from
I've
the
done my
headline
other
alone, it clearly is, as you said earlier. But
yeah,
when you read the full article, it does give you the background. And even within the article, there's this bit here. A library asked a group repeatedly misgendering trans athletes to leave at 9 a.m. the next day. Riley shared the librarian's name and phone number with her 700,000 followers. As you said, before we started recording, there was, I think, another tweet where she did actually put out the name and number by the look of this.
yes, she did. So the question there is going to be, what is the meaning of silent majority do its thing? Because she doesn't, she gives out the number of the library. So clearly, there's a very strong argument she is encouraging people to ring the library. But what does do its thing mean? Now, obviously, she's going to argue and say, I meant make a very reasonable, polite comment about why you disagree with this.
Or complaint.
News,
I mean,
yeah,
encouraging someone to complain is perfectly fine, isn't it? If you,
absolutely.
it's I suppose, a little bit like the whole Nigel Farage thing. Again, when he's saying, if you've got complaints with your bank, ring them up. I've said similar things. No one's going to accuse me of being inciting any kind of offences going on here. I've said, if you've got any complaints with your bank, take it up. Don't sit there in silence. And that's very, very similar to this, isn't it?
It is. But Pink News are going to say that is clearly a dog whistle, some sort of something that would be understood by, quotes, the silent majority to at least harass them. I mean, I think it would be hard to argue and say that is clearly saying ring them and make a threat like that. I think that would be a very difficult hurdle for
That'd be
Pink News
difficult.
to get across. But it might well be that, they could say, well, that was clearly a call to harass. And then we get into all this substantially true bit when it comes to defending defamation. You don't have to sort of prove that what you've said is completely true and completely accurate. You can get things wrong so long as the overall, sting of the thing you have actually justified. You have actually said, well, look,
Yeah.
we're more or less right. And in general terms, what we accused her of, is in that ballpark. But I mean, I think it is a bit
Because
of
on the
a
one hand,
leap
you've got this
complaint.
satellite argument where you've got some argument that people will be just ringing up to complain, and then is that okay? Is that really harassment? Well, no, ringing up to complain isn't. But then it was the fallout, because they report one woman since been indicted on one count of making a false threat and one count of intentionally conveying misleading information that a threat was on the way. So that's what sparked it all. That's what sparked their article, the headline linking to it, and then her response to it.
Yeah.
So we thought
So
this was interesting to do an overview of.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because, like I say, it's all going to, take it in stages. It's all going to hinge on what does linked to mean, and also what does do its thing mean. And like I say, that's why these cases are so tricky and very hard sometimes to advise on, because those are matters of fact, and it's all down to the judge. It doesn't matter what the defense, the claimant, and the defendant argue the meanings of those words are. Ultimately, a judge will say, well, I think that your average, normal, sort of reasonable person would interpret the words this way. And I suspect we'll see in the comments. I mean, please put in the comments your opinion as to what you think the meaning of those two phrases are. And it'd be very interesting, because I suspect we'll get a very broad spectrum of opinion, and reasonable people can very much disagree on the meaning of things. Because,
Particularly
like I
this
said,
one.
yeah, because judges are not obliged to reach the objectively correct answer. They are just obliged to reach an answer that a reasonable person could reach. And it wouldn't matter if the appeal court, if this was to go to court and be appealed, it wouldn't matter if the appeal court said, actually, we would have interpreted that a different way. So long, but we can see why the judge did interpret it that way, because these are all reasonable interpretations, and that's why defamation can be very, very risky. Because you know, if you were to say to me, "What does this word mean?" Linked to, I'm not sure. Is it suggesting it's causative? I think linked to is suggesting causation there, but
It
then you get to
sounds
the
deliberately provocative, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah,
yeah, I think
especially with
my
the
my my view is
harassment
any
arrest.
reasonable person would think that that's deliberately provocative. It's a deliberate attack. In my view, reasonable people might think that.
Yeah, I think with the reference to harassment as well, it's clearly setting her up as the instigator and the bad guy. So I
Yeah.
think this is very problematic for Pink News, because it's clearly, and that's presumably why they did the headline. They probably don't have a very high opinion of this person. So yeah, they are saying you are the villain of the piece, and this is your fault. Because I think a lot of people would say, yeah, if you're going to do this and post numbers out, you must know there's people out there who are going to do things like
Mm,
this. So yes, you are responsible for this. You are culpable. So that's going to be difficult for Pink News. But then there's going to be the second stage, which is, well, actually, what is the truth of the situation? And if you read the whole article, what's the interpretation there? Have they sort of established their case by saying, she
mm,
put the tweet out and then there was a bomb scare, and we think that's enough for linked.
yeah. And then if the article then says, well, this is what happened. This is what happened at the library. Group was asked to leave. She got annoyed by it. She put a tweet out with the phone number, knowing that people would ring. And I think it's reasonable to assume statistically that somebody will take it a step too far.
Yeah.
And in that sense, there is a link if you look at it like that. But when you look at the headline by itself, even arguably when you read the article, I think some people might still be confused about it. It's not clear cut, is it?
Well, I mean, Pink News, I'm going to say they have an agenda. I'm not suggesting that's in a negative way. They obviously have a particular, you know, editorial viewpoint, and they are not clearly not a big fan of Riley Gaines. So therefore, I think they'd probably say, yes, it is meant to be an article that is suggesting she is a bad person. This is not neutral reportage. I mean, it's reportage, but with an editorial, like side to it, which is perfectly reasonable. It's perfectly reasonable for a news organization like that to have a viewpoint.
Mm,
But so that would present difficulties for them, because in court, like, first question is going to be, now, you don't like Riley Gaines, do you? No, you don't like anything she stands for. No, you think she is dangerous to the trans community. Yes.
mm,
You've got all this line of questioning, and then when it's so what you're suggesting is, you hold her responsible for this, don't you? Well, yes. And that's the meaning you wanted to convey to your readers, isn't it? Well, yes. So, there's some great
mm.
questions there,
Yeah.
for the claimant, but
Quite a
equally there's
straightforward lineup,
a
really, isn't
lot.
it? Because they
Yeah,
will probably want to agree with most of that, which is the dream for cross examination. You get a whole list
absolutely.
of things they will agree to, naturally follow your conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, this is a case where if this goes to trial, I think basically it'll be very, very easy for the claimants to get the arguments on the facts with the questioning, but I think it'll all turn down to submissions on the law from the
Mm,
defence, in terms of, well, notwithstanding all that and our client's antagonism towards the claimant, what we have said is not defamatory as a matter of law because X, Y, and Z hasn't proved a loss. That's not the actual meaning. We've not suggested that. Actually, it's true. It's in the public interest. Bail and antidote, all that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, if there was to be a trial about this, I mean, at this stage, and obviously we've not seen any full pleadings or anything like that, but yeah, I mean, it's really 50-50. If I was asked to advise on this, I would definitely be sort of going, okay, bash a letter before claim out and see what they say. Let's see what hint as to what their defence is. See what they, because let's find out what's actually an issue here. Do they challenge our meaning of the words? What are they suggesting? So yeah, wouldn't surprise me if a letter before action went off just to test the water.
indeed. Well, there it is. Very interesting chat. Do make sure we're on both channels here, hopefully, if we get this put out properly. So make sure you like the video on both channels and subscribe to both channels. The other channel being The Art of Law, if you're on my channel, on Black Belt Barrister here. So make sure you hit that. Make sure you also hit the notification bell, because that gives you updates as to when new videos come out. So we hope you found that interesting. Alan, I thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time.